Marinette Hits Her Head, a Miraculous Ladybug fanfiction, written and narrated by Christina. Chapter 13, Second Chances. Marinette let out a half-hearted grunt as a loud noise shook through her room, then defiantly closed her eyes and snuggled deeper into the soft blanket tucked against her cheek. The same blanket that Cat Noir had covered her with after their talk on the balcony. Marinette grinned dreamily. Cat Noir had carried her to bed. Granted, he had lifted or moved her as Ladybug when necessity called for it, but it felt different and more special for him to protect and take care of her as Marinette. Another crash sounded from outside, and Marinette groaned wearily, tucking the blanket further over her head in a vain attempt to block it out. Tiki, doesn't Shadowmoth ever sleep? What time is it anyway? Time to go be a superhero, Marinette. Your partner's waiting for you, and he's probably tired too after the long talk you two had. Marinette brightened at the thought of seeing Cat Noir and hurriedly jumped out of her bed. Well then, what are we... She crumpled to the ground as a wave of nausea and dizziness overcame her, and her head throbbed painfully. Marinette! Tiki cried out, hurrying over to her holder's side. You have to be more careful. You've worn yourself out so much already. Marinette gave her a tight smile. I'm fine, Tiki. Don't worry. Tiki, spots on. Marinette sighed with relief as the suit washed all her former symptoms away and left her feeling energized and ready for whatever dangers she might face. Or so she thought. Ladybug flipped open her yo-yo and frowned as she noticed the green beacon indicating her partner's position. The sewers again? Really? Things must be pretty serious. She hopped off the roof and crept her way through the darkened streets before finding the nearest manhole and crawling inside. She shivered with cold and disgust as she tried to take her mind off the smell. The pathways were dimly lit, and she was unfamiliar with this section, so the going was slower than usual. I really wish I had Cat Noir's night vision right about now, Ladybug muttered, gingerly stepping over a loose pipe as she did her best to avoid small puddles and jagged potholes. Fancy meeting you here, m'lady, a familiar voice said from behind her, and Ladybug turned to see Cat Noir emerge from the shadows. Ladybug wrinkled her nose. There's nothing fancy about this place. Why are you down here anyway? Cat Noir's face grew serious as he pulled out his staff. See for yourself. He extended it upwards toward the surface, and the two peered through it as the stick poked up through a grate and gave a view of the city street above. Ladybug narrowed her eyes, then gasped in horror as pedestrians were being targeted one by one and evaporating into a puff of pixelated pink smoke. Where's it coming from? We have to go out there. We can't just leave them like this. She made as if to go up the ladder, but Cat Noir caught her arm. Ladybug, wait. We can't rush into this one. There's too many of them. Too many of what? Some kind of drones. There must be hundreds of them, and each one is equipped with lasers and explosives. Look. Ladybug peered back into the stick and began to make out the dark shapes that zigged and zagged across the skyline, chasing down and eliminating anyone in sight. Whoever's controlling them is too good. I barely made it down here, and we're lucky they didn't see you coming. Ladybug raised an eyebrow. Too good, even for the legendary Cat Noir? We've dealt with tough villains before, and we'll deal with this one too. Nothing can stop a cat and ladybug duo, she said with a wink, turning confidently back to the ladder, but Cat Noir stopped her again, and she paused as she noticed the seriousness in his voice. Ladybug, it's because I fought villains like him before that I know we need to be careful. These drones are relentless, and they have some kind of advanced sensor system, and they can't be reasoned with. They're deadly accurate, and one shot will erase you completely. Ladybug eyed him carefully and felt herself growing worried. But you escaped them, didn't you? Well, yes, but that was mostly because I de-transformed, and Ply created a diversion for me. Cat Noir seemed to sense the change in her expression and touched her shoulder with a reassuring smile. Hey, I still know we can beat him, and you're right, we make a perfect team. I just want us to be careful. She nodded, feeling part of her confidence return. So, in the past, what did we do to defeat someone like this? Cat Noir tilted his head thoughtfully. Well, the ground shook as something blasted the street above, and rubble crashed down around them as an opening was torn into the ceiling. Dozens of drones hovered over them, pinpointing their lasers, while a nasally voice snarled over a metallic comlink. There you are. Ladybug, run! Cat Noir exclaimed, pushing her away from the blast, then darting in the opposite direction. Hey, over here, you tin cans! It His voice faded away as Ladybug burst into a sprint, barely managing to keep her footing as she raced around corners and made her way down the darkened sewer tunnels. She wished she could have stayed with Cat Noir, but then again it was probably safer this way so they wouldn't both be caught at once. After a while, she paused to catch her breath and assess her next course of action as she listened anxiously for any signs she was being followed. The passage was quiet except for eerie drips of water mixed with the faint scratching of rats. The villain must have sent his drones after Cat Noir first. She had to get back to him. She bit her lip nervously as her mind whirled with questions. How long would he be able to elude the drones? What if they'd gotten to him already? Ladybug shook her head, trying to shove aside the fear that was rising within her. She needed to focus. This was too dangerous to make mistakes. There was no chance for do-overs. Unless... She reached into her yo-yo and stared at the bracelet that now lay across her palm and glimmered in the dim light. Notches were carved into the side, followed by a narrow snake's head that seemed to twitch warningly. It was dangerous to mess with time, and even more so to merge two Miraculouses. But she didn't know who the snake holder was, and she couldn't de-evilize the Akuma without the powers of Ladybug. She hesitated, then an echo of distant blasts made the decision for her as she slid the Miraculous over her wrist. It was a risk she'd have to take. For the city. For Cat Noir. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "Sass, Tiki, unify." She watched as blue diamonds etched their way down across her suit and a small harp appeared at her waist. Her normally short pigtails transformed into a long, sleek braid that hung halfway down her back, and she could feel her mask morph to cover more of her face and highlight her eyes. Her yo-yo buzzed, and she quickly flipped it open and held it up to her ear. "Cat Noir? Hey, I managed to get away from the drones, and I think they're headed back towards you. I'll try to get to you as soon as I can, but now that they've found us, it might be better to go above ground for now. We're too exposed down here." "Thanks, and you're right. Let's meet up at the Trocadero and see if we can come up with a plan." "Will do." Ladybug, or Lady Aspis as she now decided to call herself, was about to call up the power of second chance when she decided to wait until she met up with Cat Noir. 5 minutes wasn't a lot of time to work with, and they would need every extra second they could get. Heart-pounding, she climbed back onto the street and was relieved to find her estimations had been correct. The Trocadero was only a couple blocks away and would have a clear view of the manhole she was popping out of, in case any of the drones happened to follow her. She dodged between buildings and kept to the shadows, acutely aware of how silent and empty the usually bustling city was. Her eyes lighted on Cat Noir and she quickly slipped over to him. "Ladybug, you made it!" She smiled as she drew closer. Lady Aspis, actually. His eyes widened as he took in her new appearance, then drew into a frown as he exclaimed, "You used the snake Miraculous?" She had expected a reaction like this and responded evenly. "It's the best way to defeat the villain. You were right. It's too dangerous to face him head-on, and this will give us a chance to start over if things go badly." "Is that what your lucky charm told you?" Cat Noir countered doubtfully. "Well," Lady Aspis looked down, feeling slightly foolish. "I haven't tried my lucky charm yet, but it doesn't matter. We need this as a safety precaution." Cat Noir seemed to think it over, then agreed. "Okay, I have to admit, second chance is often a way you've used to defeat villains like this before, but that doesn't mean you should be using it." He clasped her shoulders protectively and stared down at her with an urgency and intensity she'd never seen before. "There's no way I'm letting you go through that. Let me take it, Ladybug. Please." Lady Aspis hesitated, then was about to slip the bracelet off when a mechanized figure burst out of the ground a few yards away, and Lady Aspis flicked the switch on her wrist almost instinctively. Second chance. They both ducked behind a pillar and waited to see if the drone had noticed them. "Guess there's no going back now," Cat Noir muttered uneasily, though he seemed more resigned than irritated. Lady Aspis gave him a comforting smile. "Hey, we still haven't even used our best chance yet. Lucky charm." A small stream of ladybugs swirled around them, then dropped a slim pair of glasses into her hand. "Well, those are a sight for sore eyes. At least it looks like we'll be able to see things more clearly," Cat Noir announced in a cheerful whisper, causing Lady Aspis to smother a giggle. "I love your sense of humor." Cat Noir's eyes widened, and for a moment she thought a hint of pink colored the edge of his mask while his mouth fell into a small O before quickly smoothing back into a smile. "Thanks." She could tell he was still worried, but she appreciated that he was trying to keep their spirits up in spite of it. "So, what's our next move, Lady Aspis?" Lady Aspis peered intently at the drone and back to the glasses in her hand. "Maybe we need to get a closer look. That would make—" "Watch out!" Cat Noir pulled Lady Aspis away just as a blast of lasers hit the column behind them. Drones began swarming from all directions while Cat Noir and Lady Aspis swung their weapons in a protective circle to defend themselves. Cat Noir, look! An opening there! Cat Noir followed the direction she was pointing, and they both made their way through the swarm and into a narrow alleyway. How are we supposed to get a closer look at them if they won't let us get anywhere close? Cat Noir had a point. With this much laser power, it was impossible to even think of trying to decipher any markings, and the drones were almost nothing more than blurs as they ducked and dodged around them. Maybe we can separate one from the others, get it to follow us into a trap somehow. Lady Aspis slid to a stop as they found themselves facing a brick wall. Looks like we're the ones trapped. The heroes spun around as the whir of drones came from behind the corner. Quick, onto the roof! Without waiting for his response, Lady Aspis grabbed a hold of her partner and swung them both to the nearest building, continuing their escape until they were several blocks away. Not that I don't appreciate your impressive strength and considerate protection, milady, but don't you think it'd be easier if I ran on my own? Lady Aspis stopped short, her cheeks burning as she registered his hands placed timidly around her neck to steady himself, and a handsome yet flushed face mere inches away from her own. Ah! Oh, yes, sorry! She exclaimed, her arms jerking back instinctively, and Cat Noir scrambled to his feet as she all but dumped him on the rooftop. No worries, he replied kindly, though the tips of his ears that peeked out from behind his hair looked about as red as her face felt. Lady Aspis wanted to bury her face in her hands. This was so humiliating. Granted, she truly had been trying to protect him, and at first it had been the best option for getting them out of a tight spot. But it must have been so awkward, and it was totally unnecessary for her to have carried him so far. Her eyes wandered to the bracelet on her wrist. Would it be too selfish to use her power to spare them both this embarrassing experience? She had learned a little about the drones, and it'd be better if she started over anyway. Wasn't that the whole reason she was wearing this Miraculous? She glanced over at Cat Noir, who was facing away from her, then quickly whispered the words, "Second chance." Lady Aspis felt a hand pull her back behind a pillar and realized the first drone must be waiting for them on the other side. Guess there's no going back now, Cat Noir muttered uneasily, though he seemed more resigned than irritated. Lady Aspis grinned smugly. Or is there? He looked back at her in alarm. Did it already not work? What happened? Lady Aspis stiffened as heat flooded her cheeks, then exclaimed, "Oh, lucky charm!" A small stream of ladybugs swirled around them, then dropped a slim pair of glasses into her hand. Well, those are a sight for sore eyes. At least it looks like we'll be able to see things more clearly, Cat Noir said, his former cheer returning while Lady Aspis chuckled in relief. All right, wise guy, why don't you try taking a crack at how to get past our friend over there? Cat Noir was about to look out, then smirked. Ha! You thought that glasses pun would go over my head, didn't you? But turns out I can see right through it. Lady Aspis shrugged and poked his nose teasingly. I was more referring to your untimely humor, but that works too. He seemed about to say something more when Lady Aspis remembered the incoming drone attack and leapt to her feet. Come on, we have to move! They darted out of the way just as the pillar exploded behind them and a buzz of enemy drones filled the air. Soon they were swatting drones left and right, but Lady Aspis kept her eyes on where the opening in their lines would be, and Cat Noir willingly followed her through it. I think we need to find a way to get a closer look at one of them, which means we're going to have to set a trap, she exclaimed, glancing back at him as they ran to the next alleyway. Looks like we're the ones who are trapped. Lady Aspis looked up and found herself face to face with the brick wall again, and was about to turn around when the drones neared the corner and she pulled her partner onto the roof instead. She ducked behind a chimney and made sure they weren't followed, then quickly set him back on his feet. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. It was just the quickest way to... Cat Noir interrupted her with a smile. It's okay, don't worry about it. He touched his hand shyly behind his neck as he added, To be honest, I kinda liked it. Lady Aspis straightened in surprise as a blush filled her cheeks. Really? Well, yeah. It's not every day I get to be carried to safety by my favorite superhero, he added with a wink. Her heart fluttered a bit, and for a moment her mind was taken back to the delightful time a few hours earlier where she had felt the same way as Marinette, but she quickly shook her head and tried to focus. Okay, so we know the drones are super precise and seem to be targeting any sign of movement. Maybe we could use that to our advantage. Do you think the drones would go after a moving car? Cat Noir nodded his head slowly. Yeah, that might work. We could tie a rock or something to the gas pedal and lead most of the drones away while you and I corner one and see if we can get a good look at it. The heroes nodded in agreement and split up in different directions as they set about putting their plan into motion. Lady Aspis glanced up at the cloud of drones sweeping across the city, then back at Cat Noir, who was positioned near one of the empty vehicles lining the street. Ready? He nodded, then disappeared from view as the engine roared and sputtered to life, then began careening down the road. Lady Aspis turned her attention to the drones, who swerved to follow it, and she quickly singled one out from the back as she readied her yo-yo to grab it. Cat Noir landed beside her, and the two chased after the mechanical swarm as they followed the car down the street. Lady Aspis felt a triumphant tug as the last drone was trapped within the confines of her yo-yo, and quickly began pulling it back in their direction. "Milady, watch out!" Lady Aspis glanced up and realized the drones must have detected the motion from her yo-yo, as dozens of them began swerving and firing in their direction. Cat Noir dove in front of her just as the nearest drone sent out a deadly burst of shots her way. Time seemed to stop as she watched the laser beam surge directly toward Cat Noir's chest. She flicked her wrist just as it reached inches away from his heart. Second chance! Lady Aspis pulled her partner onto the roof, treasuring his closeness for a moment before quickly setting him down behind the chimney as she tried to explain her previous plan. Cat Noir listened attentively. What happened last time? Well, it worked at first. All the drones went after the car and we almost captured one that was lagging behind, but as soon as my yo-yo grabbed it, the other drone sensed the movement and came raining down on us. Lady Aspis grimaced as the image of Cat Noir's near incineration flashed through her mind, but she determinedly brushed it aside. Cat Noir's gaze seemed to soften a bit, then he touched his chin thoughtfully. What if instead of just one car, we set loose a whole bunch of cars? That way there'll be more confusion and the drones will be split up into more directions. Lady Aspis brightened and nodded eagerly. That's a great idea. Cat Noir smiled encouragingly. All right, why don't you jump back to the beginning? That way we have more time to set our plan into action. Only if you're feeling up to it, that is, he added, a glint of worry showing in his eyes. Lady Aspis flicked her wrist with a smile. Second chance. Lady Aspis pulled Cat Noir to his feet and ducked to the left before the oncoming drones could attack them, going a different direction from the way they usually went. Cat Noir followed her willingly, and they leapt on top of a rooftop and crouched behind a chimney as Lady Aspis explained the new version of the plan. So, if we set a bunch of cars in motion, the drones won't notice if there's some extra movement going on in the sidelines, and we can snag one of them when they're not looking. Cat Noir tilted his head doubtfully. I don't think that'll work. Lady Aspis stiffened slightly. Why not? Because most people don't leave their keys in the car, so even if we tied a rock to the gas pedals, nothing would happen. I could use my cataclysm to try and short-circuit the whole thing, but that would only work once, unless I transformed back a bunch of times. Oh, you're right, I should have thought of that. She glanced down for a moment before looking up and poking him teasingly. Guess that's what I get for listening to a cat, since this was your idea. Cat Noir bristled playfully. Hey, I have a ton of great ideas. For example, not listening to that one. Okay, so any ideas on how we can get a closer look at one of the drones? Cat Noir tapped his chin thoughtfully as he eyed the hordes of drones monitoring the streets below. Maybe it doesn't have to be so complicated. Have we tried looking at them through my telescope? Lady Aspis blinked. No. That's a good idea. Let's try it. Cat Noir opened his stick with a flourish, then bowed as he passed it to her. What exactly are you looking for, milady? Lady Aspis squinted as she tried to pinpoint the device on one of the robotic beings. I'm not sure. It just seemed to make sense there must be something to see up close if the Lucky Charm was glasses. Or far away. Lady Aspis glanced up in surprise. Huh? Well, while a lot of glasses, like reading glasses, do help magnify things up close, some prescriptions help you see things better that are far away. You're right. Maybe it means we should be looking somewhere farther away. But where? And for what? Lady Aspis groaned in frustration. Ugh, these Lucky Charms can be so confusing sometimes. Cat Noir touched his shoulder reassuringly. Don't worry, you'll figure it out. She smiled gratefully, then turned her attention back to the telescope. There does seem to be some kind of marking on the sides. If I could just...
Ladybug and Cat Noir detected. Ladybug and Cat Noir detected.
Lady Aspis ducked as Cat Noir sent a spinning kick in the drone's direction, crushing it with one blow. Lady Aspis scooped up some of the remains as more drones began swarming in their direction, and they raced for cover. Well, it looks like we got our closer look. Yeah, if we live long enough to see it, Lady Aspis replied dryly, though she felt her hope rising as she spared a few glances to the crumpled heap between her arms. In there! Cat Noir exclaimed, running into a darkened shop with Lady Aspis close on his heels. They crouched against the wall and waited breathlessly as a herd of drones passed by, but cautiously relaxed as the sounds moved farther away. Lady Aspis held the drone up to the moonlight and examined it curiously. Property of the happy camper? Funny, I thought the whole point of camping was to get away from technology. Lady Aspis stared at the insignia quizzically. Unless our opponent is one of those annoying gamers who camps out the whole time. That would explain why we haven't spotted a villain so far. You're right. The happy camper's cozied up somewhere and sending his drones to do the dirty work. Cat Noir scoffed mockingly. Sounds like he and Shadowmoth must get along well. Or she, Lady Aspis added pointedly, though her eyes twinkled teasingly. Of course, Cat Noir replied, then grinned. In fact, the best gamer in my school is a girl, though she would never do something like this. Lady Aspis lowered her head slightly as she remembered just how cruel and desperate their situation was. She glanced around and noticed the ground and tables nearby were covered with blast marks, and broken brooms and jars lay scattered around from where people must have tried to defend themselves. How could anyone do something like this? To be so full of anger and selfishness that they're willing to hurt and destroy so much. These people were just going about their day, minding their own business, when some villain sends robots to attack their families, and then erase them completely. And now, all they have is us. She finished quietly. Cat Noir slipped an arm around her shoulders and gave her a friendly squeeze. I know it's bad, lady, but we've faced villains like this before. Whoever it is was probably hurt by something and isn't thinking clearly, which is why Shadowmoth is using them to lash out at other people. I know it seems really overwhelming, and I know it hurts to see all the damage they've caused, and we're going to do whatever we can to stop them. But we can't lose sight of the real enemy, the real mission. We may have to fight for now, but we're going to win. And one day, when we take back Shadowmoth's Miraculous, we'll free the city from its evil once and for all. Lady Aspis looked up at him and smiled. You're really good at these kind of speeches, you know that? Thanks. I watched a lot of inspiring movies growing up. They were silent for a moment, then Lady Aspis asked, So what now? We just look in every direction for where this camper guy might be? Cat Noir glanced down and she followed his gaze to the snake around her wrist, the head growing dangerously close back to the starting point. I think it would be best if we had a little more time, and maybe now that we know we have to look for the gamer, you'll notice something you didn't before. Lady Aspis nodded in agreement and was about to go back when she impulsively threw her arms around her partner and drew him in for a quick hug. Thanks for everything, Cat Noir. Anytime, little bug. So we're just gonna run around, avoid drones, and look for anyone who might seem suspicious? Yep, Lady Aspis replied resolutely, though the plan seemed even more preposterous after hearing him repeat it. What about your lucky charm? Doesn't that sometimes give you a clue as to where to look? Lady Aspis leaned against the wall as they paused to catch their breath, then inspected the glasses her lucky charm had bestowed upon her. They look like normal glasses to me. The only thing I could think of is that we have to look at something nearby? Lady Aspis smirked wearily. Actually, I was going to say farther away. Something you helped point out, actually. Cat Noir's shoulders slumped. I was afraid you'd say that. Or I did. He perked up with a playful grin. Anything else helpful I said on previous missions? I'm not slowing you down, am I? He said it jokingly, but she caught the anxious shadow in his eyes. She smiled back at him. You've been super helpful. In fact, I couldn't have done any of this without you. Cat Noir beamed in delight and seemed about to say more when his expression darkened and he pulled her behind him as he swung out his stick to deflect the torrent of incoming lasers. Cat Noir! Her cry of warning echoed vainly through her ears as she watched a drone come at him from behind and leave her standing next to a puff of smoke. Second chance! The next few hours seemed to blur together in a tangled web of things to do and not do, as Lady Aspis tried to keep track of it all in order to help her and Cat navigate their way through the city, in hopes of finding the infuriating yet deadly happy camper. After a while, they formed a system. They each raced along one side of the street, ducking between shadows and poking their heads through doorways, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was controlling their enemies, then met up at the end and compared what they had found, which was usually nothing. Lady Aspis glanced over at Cat Noir as they ran to check a new section. Any luck? Cat Noir sent her a wink. Isn't that supposed to be your department? Lady Aspis rolled her eyes, but felt herself grin. Hey, black cats are lucky too. It's just usually the bad kind. Cat Noir glanced up with playful thoughtfulness as he easily kept pace beside her. Well, normally I would consider running into a supervillain to be bad luck, but since that's what we're trying to do, wouldn't it actually take good luck to find one? I think either one would help in this case, Lady Aspis replied, skidding to a stop before quickly changing course in order to avoid being spotted by a cluster of drones. I wonder what kind of luck snakes have. I mean, since you're technically half snake now, I wonder if that's interfering with your typical good luck powers. Lady Aspis let out a small chuckle, then stopped as she noticed a strange expression come over his face, and he turned to her more seriously. Why Lady Aspis? I mean, why did you choose that name? He seemed to be trying to keep his tone light, but there was an underlying earnestness to it, and for some reason she could tell this meant a lot to him. Unfortunately, she didn't have an explanation for it, and she didn't know what answer he was looking for. I'm not sure. It just kind of popped in my head and felt right. She brightened and added, Besides, doesn't it mean viper in Latin or something? Greek, he supplied quietly, his gaze growing distant before turning back to her with a smile. It's a good name. I like it. She felt her cheeks flush at his praise and quickly ducked her head, hoping he wouldn't notice. So, my Lady Aspis, shall we... His words were cut short as an explosion erupted inches away from them and would have hit her full on if Cat Noir hadn't pulled her out of the way in time. They rolled to their feet and swiftly darted behind some dumpsters and into a darkened alleyway. We should be safe for now, Lady Aspis panted wearily, both listening intently as additional booms and roars sounded further up the street. Cat Noir was about to nod in agreement when his eyes widened. Ladybug, your hair's on fire! Lady Aspis gasped in alarm as heat burst along the tips of her shoulders and yellow flames pulsed around the corners of her eyes. Cat Noir raked his claws across her braid, and they both jumped back as a smoldering mess dropped between them and withered down into a dreary clump. The smell of burned hair drifted up with a dismal finality, and while she was grateful to be unharmed, she couldn't help feeling a bitter loss as she stared at the burned heap and fingered the singed strands that hung loosely around her face. She glanced up and realized Cat Noir was staring at her in stunned silence, his mouth parted slightly while his eyes were wide with astonishment. Lady Aspis glanced away self-consciously as she ran her hand through the frazzled dark ends in a vain attempt to settle them before giving up with a sigh. It looks awful, doesn't it? Cat Noir snapped to attention, as if freed from a trance, and hastily responded, No! His gaze softened as he added, You don't look awful at all. Lady Aspis felt a part of her heart start melting into jelly as she stared into the rich sincerity of his adoring green eyes, then quickly shook herself and stepped back into focus. Okay, so since we're out of luck on locating this camper, maybe we should get to higher ground and see if we can pick out any patterns in the drone's movements. Cat Noir raised an eyebrow. Are you sure? I thought the plan was we would search in this direction, then you restart so we can check a different place. Lady Aspis flinched a bit as she felt herself growing flustered, and gestured aimlessly as she struggled to respond. Well, I still have some time left, and it'd be best to get as much information as possible, right? Cat Noir nodded. That makes sense. Maybe they're all coming from one direction. The camper has to have a base somewhere. Lady Aspis breathed a hidden sigh of relief, their conscience twinged reproachfully. It was true, that had been the plan, but this sequence of events had been so much more pleasant than the other ones lately, and some part of her wanted him to remember all this. Was that wrong? And what if they could find something useful from examining the drones? They may even find and defeat the main villain, and this timeline would become the final one. Unlikely, sure, but it wasn't wrong to hope. Let's head to the Eiffel Tower. It's pretty central and we should get a good view from there. Cat Noir hesitated, then shook his head. We'd be too exposed up there. But don't worry, he added, his eyes twinkling cheerfully. I know the perfect spot. Dark blue strands whipped across her face as she swung her way through the city, her eyes fixed on her partner who led them to a flat roof with lots of decorative trees and shrubs to hide their presence, while still having a wide view of the city. Wow, this really is the perfect spot. Lady Aspis directed her gaze to the streets below and quickly registered the various swarms of drones casing the area, but their paths seemed to be random and it was difficult to keep track of which one was which. She glanced over at her partner who settled next to her. Cat Noir, have you spotted any? She trailed off as she realized he appeared to have been watching her instead of viewing the streets, and he quickly ducked his head before turning back apologetically. Sorry, it's just... I've never seen you with your hair down before. His voice carried a tone of wonder with it, and she blushed as she realized he must like what he saw. As if to confirm her thoughts, he continued, It looks really pretty. I know I said you didn't look awful before, but the truth is, you look really beautiful. His eyes shone with tender admiration. Lady Aspis' heart fluttered, then jolted to a stop as a beam of light hit Cat Noir square in the back and he evaporated into a cloud of pink smoke. Second chance! Lady Aspis narrowed her eyes with angry frustration, mostly at herself. Well, at least now she could add letting Cat Noir see her with her hair down to the list of what not to do. Guess is everything all right, milady? Lady Aspis took a deep breath and nodded toward the roof. Come on, the main villain is camped out somewhere controlling the drones, and we have to find where he is. Cat Noir followed close behind, but tilted his head worriedly. Won't that take a really long time? Where are we supposed to look? Lady Aspis sighed. I'm not sure, but I do know a lot of places not to look. What about your lucky charm? Doesn't that sometimes give me a clue as to where to look? Ladybug cut in edgily. Nope, it's useless. Cat Noir fell silent, and she felt bad for letting her frustration out on him. But with each step she took, she could feel a sense of anxiety and dread threatening to overpower her, and she glanced about fearfully as she tried to anticipate where the drones might appear next. This was getting them nowhere. Cat Noir was right. It would take ages for two people to come through the entire city of Paris, and they only had 5 minutes. Their only hope was to somehow stumble across whoever was controlling the drones, but they didn't even know who they were looking for, and every second they wasted was another chance for something to go wrong. The timer on her yo-yo went off, and Lady Aspis dove into the subway station with Cat Noir close behind her, just as a series of explosives started raining down on the street above. She leaned wearily against the stairs for a moment, then made as if to go back on the street, not wanting to get trapped underground again. What if we stop looking? Cat Noir asked suddenly, and Lady Aspis turned to him in disbelief. What? Cat Noir remained unfazed, a thoughtful gleam in his eye that seemed almost mischievous. I mean, you've been looking for this gamer person for a while now, and we haven't been able to find him. So what if we just camp out somewhere too? He's already destroyed half the city, and if there's no one left to chase, maybe he'll get bored and come out of wherever he's hiding. Lady Aspis raised an eyebrow thoughtfully. Beat him at his own game. That could work. Though we better hope he shows himself in the next few minutes, she added, glancing down at the snakehead creeping around her wrist. Oh yeah, I forgot about that, Cat Noir said solemnly, his enthusiasm fading a bit as he swung his stick restlessly. What if we set up some kind of bait to lure him out here? Lady Aspis sighed, her fist curling tightly as she tried to restrain her frustration. We tried that already. Cat Noir thought for a moment, then asked, have we tried capturing one of the drones? Pretty pointless, they just self-destruct. What about tracking the drone's movements? That's a definite no. Do they have any weaknesses? None that we know of. What about the markings? They might tell us something. Lady Aspis clenched her teeth as she glanced down irritably. Nothing useful. What about jamming the signal? Can't. Hacking the system? Nope. Maybe we could create some kind of... I told you, we tried everything! Lady Aspis exclaimed, smashing her fist into the wall and causing the tunnel to shake as blocks of rubble crumbled down around them. Cat Noir was silent as Lady Aspis skillfully removed her hand from the large hole created by the impact of her outburst, then asked, what about setting loose zoo monkeys? Lady Aspis stared at him in confusion. Zoo monkeys? Cat Noir shrugged, a playful smirk peeking out from the shadows beneath his mask. Bet you haven't tried that before. Lady Aspis stood frozen for a moment, then burst out laughing as she pictured Cat Noir unleashing a troop of crazed monkeys on the unsuspecting drones. Cat Noir grinned as her giggles died down, then gave her a reassuring nudge. See? My point is there's always something more we can try, and I know you'll come up with a brilliant way to end this just like you always do, because you're amazing, Ladybug. Lady Aspis stood up at him as a new hope grew in her heart, then smirked as he added, and hey, if not, we can always try my monkey plan. He smiled for a moment, then glanced down at the snake on her wrist and said gently, it looks like you should probably be starting over soon. Lady Aspis sighed. Yeah, I know. She was about to reset the bracelet when Cat Noir took a hold of her hand and gave it a light kiss. You've got this, little bug. I believe in you. He winked, then slid the dial back for her as she recited bravely, second chance. Cat Noir! No! Lady Aspis screamed, throwing her yo-yo out desperately as she tried to reach him in time. But soon she was clutching nothing but dust, and her spirit broke once again. Cat Noir's heart sank as he saw a ladybug activate the snake Miraculous. I guess there's no going back now. Yeah, I know, Ladybug snapped, though she immediately ducked her head. Sorry, it's just, you've been saying that a lot. Cat Noir froze and his heart ached for her. How many times has it been? He followed quietly as Ladybug, or Lady Aspis, led him through a series of twists and turns through darkened alleyways and empty streets. But even as they were running, he could easily see the weariness in her eyes and the exhaustion written across her shoulders. "How can I help you, milady?" She avoided his gaze and kept running as she replied, "We have to find the person controlling the drones and then... or we... Ugh!" She leaned against the wall and buried her face in her hands. "I have no idea. This is ridiculous and impossible, and I don't even know what to try anymore." Cat Noir stared at her sorrowfully, his heart swelling with understanding as he remembered how heavy a burden the snake Miraculous could be. "You don't have to do this." It was a risk, but he decided to say it anyway. "You know, Ladybug, when I first used the snake Miraculous, the problem wasn't what I was doing. I just wasn't the right person for the job." "But I have to be the right person!" Lady Aspis exclaimed, her eyes flashing desperately as she struggled to hold back tears. "And even if I wasn't, I don't know where anyone lives." "But I do. Who do you need?" Lady Aspis sighed. "It doesn't matter. There's no time. You'd never make it in my 5 minutes, and I'm not risking you going out there without it." Cat Noir felt his breath catch in his throat as she glanced up at him, her wide blue eyes staring fearfully into his own as she said softly, "I'm scared, Cat. I don't want to lose you." He smiled and replied gently, "You won't lose me. You'll think of a plan. You always do." He tried to give her a hug, but she flinched and stepped away. "A plan for what? To watch Paris burn to the ground? To watch my partner get obliterated over and over again?" She looked down apologetically. "Sorry, it's just been a lot." Cat Noir studied her thoughtfully. "What if I use the snake Miraculous? We could go somewhere safe and recharge sass. That way I could take over." Lady Aspis was already shaking her head. "If you used it and I disappeared, all you could do is go back in time, whereas if we had a chance to win, I could still repair everything and set it back to normal regardless of the consequences. It has to be me," she finished, a new determination settling in her eyes. "Then at least let me help you." She looked at him curiously. "What? But you have been helping me." "No, I mean, let me help you be the snake holder. When was the last time you ate something?" Lady Aspis tilted her head. Not since dinner, which I guess was days ago." Cat Noir smiled encouragingly. "Okay, so next time you restart, I want you to tell me you need a snack break, and I'll cover for you. Will you go eat and restart when your time goes out? It might seem wasteful to spend a whole chance on something like food, but trust me, it's way more exhausting trying to go without it." Lady Aspis hesitated, then nodded agreeably. "Sounds like a plan." "So, what's the plan, milady?" Lady Aspis led them around the corner in order to avoid the first drone attack, then paused as she turned shyly to her partner. "Actually, no plan this time. I just, need a snack break." Cat Noir's face brightened. "Why didn't you say so? I'll hold him off so you can go eat and recharge." Lady Aspis shook her head. "No, please, I want you to come with me." She blushed as she realized she had grabbed hold of his arm and quickly released it as she tried to say lightly, "It's not fair for only one of us to get a break, and besides, we'll be safer if we stick together." Cat Noir seemed about to protest, but something changed in his expression, and he relaxed with an understanding smile. "Okay." Lady Aspis breathed a sigh of relief as the strangling fear of being separated faded slightly. "This was kind of your idea, so any thoughts on where we should go?" Cat Noir grinned. "Oh, I know the perfect place." Lady Aspis flinched at the familiar words, but tried to shove the warning thoughts to the back of her mind as she willingly followed Cat Noir down a very accustomed route. "Are we headed to the Dupanchang bakery?" "Yeah, they serve the best baked goods in all of Paris, and I happen to know they let superheroes eat free," Cat Noir replied, and Lady Aspis could feel her mouth watering as delicious, comforting aromas drifted up from the shop. It was kind of funny to think Cat Noir was leading her to her own home, but it felt so right. She could so easily picture the welcome greeting they would receive as they stepped into the warm bakery, and the hushed yet pleasant conversation she and her partner would have as they stuffed their faces with scrumptious pastries, and Cat Noir would make light jokes as they took a break from the chaos reigning around them. It could be almost like a date. A peaceful, carefree date where she could finally feel safe and recharged so she could come up with an unbreakable plan, all while enjoying invigorating treats with the boy she loved. Lady Aspis' fantasy split to pieces as they rounded the corner and skidded to a halt as broad flames spattered the already broken bakery, and large chunks of rubble cluttered the street. Smoke billowed in heavy, thick clouds and wormed its way down her throat, burning her nostrils as she stumbled forward and tried not to choke. Cat Noir reached out to steady her, then both rushed toward the fire as a lone man emerged and began swatting at nearby drones with a poorly singed broom and a blackened rolling pin.
"Take that, you oversized salt-shakers! Nobody messes with my bakery and gets away with it."
"Mr. Japan, get back inside! It's too dangerous out here!" Her heart froze as she heard the fear in her partner's voice, and time seemed to slow as the surrounding drones responded to her father's reckless attack. "Dad! No!" Cat Noir's eyes widened as he stared at her in shock. Marinette. Cat Noir stared at his partner, her bluebell eyes filled with grief and panic as she watched her father evaporate in front of her. Ladybug was Marinette. The girl he loved and longed for had been right in front of him all along, but he wouldn't have a chance to say so because he knew in a moment he was going to forget it all. Lady Aspis' hand moved to her wrist, but just as she did, a drone swerved behind her and was about to envelop her in a torrent of lasers. Instinctively, Cat Noir dove between them, hugging her tightly from behind as he used his body to shield her from the fatal attack, knowing it would only add more pain to her already stricken heart. But there was no other way. He tried to feel all his love and admiration for her in that final squeeze, hoping it would bring her some small comfort and encourage her to keep going. But he knew the ruinous ache all too well, and felt his own heart ripped to pieces as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Marinette." "No!" Lady Aspis' throat burned as the raw hoarse scream rang out even after the magic of the snake Miraculous had transported her back to where this had all started, and she barely registered the bewildered face of the boy in front of her. Hot tears flooded down her cheeks, but she angrily brushed them aside as an explosion erupted above them, and Lady Aspis swung out her yo-yo defensively as she and Cat Noir took off running in an effort to escape the drones. Lady Aspis pulled Cat Noir into a small darkened storefront and shuddered as she tried to control the panicky gasps that escaped her throat. She just needed a moment to regroup, a moment to rest, a moment to assure herself that the horrible things she had witnessed were no longer true, and there was still a chance that everything would be okay. "Lady," Cat Noir began, his voice gentle and filled with sympathy, but stopped as Lady Aspis felt her resolve cave in and she clung to him fiercely. He hugged her quietly for a moment, then asked, "How long have you been trying?" "What does it matter? It's hopeless." "No, it's not. There's always hope. We can still do this, Ladybug." Lady Aspis shook her head and hugged him closer. "No, I can't. I can't lose you again. I keep watching you die over and over again, and I'm running out of ideas. Nothing works, and you're too nice," she exclaimed, tearfully shoving him a bit as she stared up at him accusingly. Cat Noir blinked in confusion. "Too nice?" She glanced away, too embarrassed to admit she'd been distracted by his generous compliments and unassuming heartfelt gestures, and still haunted by the memory of tender affection that had lingered in his voice while he whispered her real name. She was brought back to the present as the building shook from another explosion bursting outside, and Cat Noir must have read the rose-colored tinge peeking out from her mask, for the same color flooded his, and he quickly ducked his head before responding softly, "Oh, I see." They stood silently for a moment, then Cat Noir said, "I would say I'll do better next time, but I don't really know if that'll be true." Lady Aspis sighed. "It's not really your fault. It's me." She felt an empty heaviness fall over her, but it was soon burned away by the rising anger and frustration she harbored toward the situation and herself as she glared down at the cold metal band cuffing her wrist. "It's this Miraculous. It's this horrible villain, and his horrible drones, and the horrible monster of a man who sits around and lets other people do his dirty work for him while the city of Paris burns." She smashed her fist into a stack of shelves, which proved to be a mistake, as the force sent the entire thing flying through the window, shattering the glass, and in seconds dozens of searchlights and laser beams were pinpointed in their direction. "Ladybug, watch!" His words were cut off as Lady Aspis flicked her wrist and closed herself off from the world. She knew what those words meant. She had seen it happen before. And just like before, there was no way